We thank y'all very much for listening to the No Fruit Podcast. Today, we have the co-founder of Been There, Got Out, a high conflict divorce strategist and certified domestic violence advocate who helps men and women all over the world navigating the legal system with an abusive ex. And these are the type of things that we need to talk about within our communities, of just open and honest communication. So we're going to dive deep with our guest right after this.
Let's talk about love and marriage the way that God intended. Life experience, here we share it. The No Fruit Podcast. Tune in from any platform. No Fruit Podcast. Will help your spirit transform.
We have none other than the spectacular, the marvelous Lisa Johnson. Thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Wow, thank you. What a welcome.
So one of the things we do want to talk about, for those who have been in relationships across the board, right? I know what yours specifically talks about your ex, but I think one of the things that we lose track of from the very beginning is the importance of communication.
Yes.
Right? So how would you define communication for yourself before we even get into all the other particulars?
Oh my gosh, I'm so bad with definitions, but I think it's how you connect with somebody else where you can respect their point of view and they can respect your point of view. And for me, communication involves finding what we have in common and taking it from there.
Yeah, so that's I guess key with everywhere in all things. Communication is one of those parts that sometimes we struggle with, and in relationships, it's very important to communicate. So how do we handle it when we are struggling with communication, and how to get our point across when it's not coming across the way we want it to?
Yeah, I think a part of this also really involves empathy and being able to see the other person's perspective. And even if you don't agree with it, to at least acknowledge why they might see it differently than you do, and then figuring out how to take it from there. So one of the things that we work with our clients on is negotiation. And most of our clients are dealing with a very difficult ex. A lot of them have some kind of mental illness or addiction. And so often they're not logical.
Right.
And so we live in a generally, or we used to, like a logical world. And so we try to figure out like how we would do it our way, like how we'd want someone to treat us in a situation. But when you're dealing with someone who's very different from you, you have to come out of the, like, this is what I would do, and think, yeah, but this is how that person feels.
Right.
And so spend a lot more time listening. And so often we talk about mediating with somebody, because that's what happens a lot in our community. We say, when you first go in there, like the first session, keep your mouth shut.
Just listen.
Find out what the other person, what matters to the other person, like getting in their emotional headspace rather than just pushing your agenda, because everyone wants to feel listened to.
Yes.
And it's disarming. So first, just to start off, like being quiet and trying to do some social emotional skills in terms of saying, I hear you, and not jumping in with but this is what I think. Just saying, like, I hear you. I can understand why you'd feel that way.
Right.
Slowing things down and being receptive. Because again, like we all want to be heard, and we all want to feel like our emotions are valid. So instead of just saying like, but we need to do this, or how about like to realize that this is communication in general, not just mediation, is a process.
Right.
And it's not easy. And it takes time, and it takes very active listening and something we call tactical empathy. So it's a struggle, and it's, it takes work.
Yes.
And so as I'm listening to you, actively listening, right? But a lot of times we don't know how to develop that type of skill, and in that listening, a lot of times, as you were stating, we're looking to respond. We're looking for react, whatever it is, instead of also hearing that other person's side. Because I think that's the other part that we're not always aware of, or keenly aware of, is how that other person is feeling through this process as well. So do you think that if we took the time to really understand the other individual, that maybe that person will even become an ex to begin with. But but once we get to that point, would it help those processes to move a little further?
Absolutely. So you're making me think of something I haven't thought of in a little while. My partner, who's my life partner as well as my business partner,
Mm,
Chris, we've been together for 10 years. And one of the things that so impressed me when we first got together was I remember it was one of our first initial disagreements.
mm,
And as I was talking, he's like, hold on a second, I want to get a pad. And he took out a pad and then he started taking notes. I said, what are you doing? And he said, I want to make sure that you are able to say what you want and then I'm understanding you, but I want to make sure I can also respond to what you're saying and not
mhm.
forget, but
Hmm.
I don't want to interrupt. And I was like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah, yes,
And he said he learned it in business, some because
yes.
he has his MBA. And I was just like, this is brilliant
Hmm.
because he's letting me go on. He's looking at me. He's writing
Mhm,
down things that I'm saying. And there's that pause where he's not pushing to interrupt. And but he can always go back to things that I said that he wants to address
Great.
without memorizing, being like, oh, I better say something, or she's saying so many things,
mhm.
it's overwhelming.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think that that is an excellent exercise for anyone to do, whether you're a couple or a parent and a child, to say, you know what, I really want to pay attention to what you're saying, but I don't want to forget.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you don't mind, I take notes and obviously look at you, but
Right.
take it in. I mean, how validating is that?
That's great. And I think I can see myself doing that, and I've done that, like you said, in a business meeting
Mhm,
and things like that. And I remember this one time I got scolded a little bit because the supervisor was like, well, "Why are you bringing a notepad and a pen, to the meetings?" I'm like, "So I can write things down." "Oh no, you have to remember these things. You have to know these things." So I congratulate you for taking that moment to receive what he was
mhm,
providing to you. Like, hey, I find you important, and what you're saying is important,
mhm.
and for me to receive it well, I have to write it down. So, you know, kudos to you, and to how the relationship has grown from there, because it's not welcomed by everyone, especially
Mm-mm.
in the digital society. People are just like, hey, you should pick it up really fast, and why are you writing things down, and why does it take you so long to think about things and respond? So I think that's really, really big. And then, so for those that do kind of shun that and don't want to do that type of a thing, or it's not receptive, what happens then? Like, so what would
Mhm.
have happened? We'll just play this through, that if he would have said, hey, is it okay to write these things down? And the partner was like, no, like, why are you writing it down? I'm just sharing my thoughts,
Mhm.
So what do you say when communication doesn't work in that way?
Well, I think a lot of it involves what you just talked about is like thinking I have to memorize and
Hmm.
respond quickly. Responding quickly is one of the biggest problems in communication because
Mhm.
you're having this emotional knee jerk response rather than pausing
Hmm.
and taking it in. And in terms of writing things down, I mean, as you're talking, I'm like, I want to, where did I put my pen? Like, I want to
Yes.
make sure I say this thing about pausing. And I'm always writing things down. I'm
Yeah.
a writer anyway. And but when we meet with people for the first time, like an initial client, I always say, we never record these meetings, but do you mind if I take
Take
notes so I don't
notes.
have to memorize what you're saying? And everybody appreciates it because they know like we're going to pay attention. And then later when we follow up, they're always impressed with like, wow, you really
Hmm.
listened to me.
Mhm.
Hmm.
I felt
Mhm.
so validated by you. But I think pausing is so necessary because you need to let things sit,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
many conversations are emotional and your feelings are not always the best way to respond because when you're emotional you're not thinking clearly.
Mhm.
Hmm.
You can't
Mhm.
make good decisions when you're upset.
Right.
And so that's why it is so important to pause. And in our when we teach strategic communication, my partner Chris came up this thing called pass. It's
Mhm.
like PAS, and it's pause, analyze, and strategize.
Mhm.
Like
Hmm.
first think about it and then think about like what exactly is going on here before I respond, and then decide how do I respond appropriately.
Yeah.
So it's that that beat in between that we all should be doing
Hmm.
instead of just like the back and forth whatever. And I think it's foolish to think that everybody should memorize things because our brains are working really hard
Mhm.
anyway. Like
Yes.
why not take notes and like let your brain focus on other things,
Yeah.
and of course you'll go back to it, but it makes your brain work better.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think in pausing, what it causes the other person to do as well is to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
And because now I force you to slow your thinking. So now all of a sudden you're, as you stated, not being as emotional. Now you might be a little more logical and more thoughtful in your response, because now you're going to say or have the opportunity to say everything that you want to say in a 1 minute span versus trying to fit it in 10 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. And
You-
actually, so you reminded me of something. So one of the perks that we offer our clients is something we call the permission slip plan, because my background is in education, and everything we do comes from an educational perspective. So because we teach strategic communication, we tell our clients, when you have something that you think you want to send to your ex,
Mhm.
send it to us first and let us take a look at it, because we will proofread and edit it for you, because we want you to have clean hands and we want the record to be clean, because our clients are all dealing with court issues. And we
Right.
say we want you to be perfection. You always want to present as the best co-parent ever. And people pop off. So they're always like, well, no, I want to say, and we're like, you have to wait. By sending it to us, it forces you to pause, because
Mhm.
we're busy and you have to wait maybe up to a day to hear back to us. And a lot of times things settle down when there's time to think about it, and letting somebody else take a look at it. And then obviously we don't send it to their ex, we send it back to them, and then
Right.
they
send it
can look
along.
it too. But it's the slowing down that really makes things you present better when you've had time to think about it, and having that third party look at it. I say, like, we'll do it for you at first, and you're going to learn to get really good at this.
Right.
And that's how they learn it. So a lot of them are traumatized and they can't think straight, but then they see, oh, I see what you're doing. Like, this is working. And so that helps them heal faster, as well as get their ex's voice out of their head, because there's a lot of fear associated with communication because of the power dynamics in the original relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And then sometimes
So,
it's wrapped with trauma. There's
yeah.
wrapped with, like you said, some fear and other things that are going on. And that
Mhm.
even if you don't want it to speak through when you're writing, it does come through, and, may not come through the best way.
Right.
And a lot of times they're using, you statements instead of I statements.
Mhm.
And then that just points the blame and just goes around and around, and doesn't get very far. So talk to us a bit more about, the dealing with some of that trauma when it's individuals and trying to communicate, whether it's you're in a relationship or it is an ex, and you're trying to just navigate life, whether you have children together or you have property together or whatever it is that you need to continue to communicate. You can't just do a clean break
All
at
the
that
time.
point. Yeah, no. So how do you still handle the trauma and still handle that fear, but do it in a respectful way?
Yeah. You're asking me really big questions, but I'm going to try to answer as best I can. All right. So all of our clients, men and women all over the world, are dealing with severe trauma. And so I think first, just recognizing that it is normal to feel really uncomfortable with having to communicate with this other person, because of the power dynamic, because of what you've been through with them, because you have no choice and you have to. It's really scary. And a lot of people feel it in their throat or in their stomach or in their heart. Like, they'll see just a little they hear a ding of a notification, they'll be like, they have like these extreme responses because of everything connected with that. I think hearing that is so normal calms people down. So they're like, oh, it's not just me. Like, I often say, it's hard to get your ex's voice out of your head because they're still in your inbox. They're still sending you these messages, and you have to co-parent together. And then people think, well, if I'm not perfect, or if I don't say the right thing, I'm going to get in trouble. Like, our community lives with a lot of sense of dread that if they do something wrong, just like when they're in the relationship, they would get blamed for it. And now, what if a judge sees it? What if a judge thinks I'm a terrible person and
Right.
therefore a terrible parent, and they're going to take my kids away? So their brain is like racing and running away. And so a lot of what we do involves like reminding them of the truth, and reminding them of like where they're at in this point. Like, they got out of this relationship, but they're still dealing with all this fear. But that doesn't mean that it's real. It's that it's still the same dynamic. And so pausing and saying, let's look at it. So when we get, like, we call it like a wall of angry text from their ex saying, you didn't do this right, and blah, blah, blah. And then we talk about it together. I think it starts to take it apart and realize, like, what is this person actually doing?
Hmm.
So one thing that they are usually doing is they want to keep engaging with you. And because they don't have the day-to-day interaction, they're really limited. We always say to three things: money, kids, and the court. So money and the court go hand in hand.
Hmm.
And that's already like awful because our clients are dealing with the legal system and bleeding money. But the kids are the reason that you have to keep communicating, usually because you're trying to co-parent. And so they'll say things because they want to get your attention. And so to remind people that it's not just positive attention, they want your negative attention even more.
Right.
So they'll bait you. They'll say things because they know how to get under your skin.
Right.
And so we want to respond, we want to defend ourselves, especially because there's so many lies and false accusations. And so getting out of defense mode, again, like pausing, analyzing, and strategizing, like, let's break down this huge wall of angry text and think, like, is there actually anything in here that you need to answer that has to do with your child?
Hmm.
Or are they just railing against you? And so we want them to starve this other person of their precious attention by saying, like, we just answer this part, to do really short communication. Um, one of our a person that we really admire is named Bill Eddy.
Mm.
He started something called the High Conflict Institute. He used to be a social worker, and then he became a family lawyer. He's authored about 20 different books,
Hmm.
and now he works with businesses and governmental, but everything is about how do we reduce conflict. And so I got to interview him last month. He has a system that he calls BIF in terms of writing to people, which is, it stands for brief, informative, factual, and friendly, but sometimes people think it's firm.
Mm.
So that's really helpful. But the thing that Chris and I do is a little more specific in terms of like a template. It's called FRAC, FRAC, and we get into like different elements to use when you are communicating with your ex. But the spine of it is really something we call the universal agreement. And that's finding something that you have in common, like a shared goal, which sounds really crazy when you're dealing with someone that you can't stand. But when you share kids, like, there's certain universal values, like, I'm sure we can both agree how important it is to shield our children from any conflict between us.
Right.
That's something that even if they don't agree with,
Mhm.
they're not going to say it because
Mhm.
everyone knows how bad it is for kids to be stuck in the middle
Right.
of the parents fighting, whether they're together or apart. It really hurts kids. So by writing something like that, your ex or whoever,
Mhm.
your co-parent can't disagree with it publicly. Like, in their heads, they might be like, I don't care, but they cannot dispute it. So then it's almost like you've dropped an anchor. I'm sure we can both agree that it's important to shield the kids from the conflict. So then when they're still railing at you or saying things to your kid about you, that are poisonous messages, you can still keep establishing your case and your evidence by saying, like, I thought we agreed on this. And you kind of corner them, and their behavior starts to become exposed, and that's a whole other thing for court. You don't want to be the one doing that. You want to understand, like, let's try to keep it civil, but you can't say let's keep it civil, because then that's telling them what to do.
Right.
So you want to use words like you said, don't use I and you, or
Mm.
use more I. With our clients, we don't want to use the word I even as much as possible, because then they feel like you're telling me what to do.
Right.
And then you're acting like the authority. We also try not to use you very often, because then they feel like you're accusing me of something.
Right.
So it's really tricky. We try to use a lot of we's. We try not to even use pronouns if possible, like the I's and U's.
Yeah. Stick
And
to the facts. Yeah.
yeah. But like really, really short. We often say it's like you're on a game show and you're paying for every word. So we're gonna pare it down as much as possible. And you can still be friendly, and you don't have to be cold. But there's definitely a strategic way to do it, and it's not easy. And we have so many clients who are just brilliant and successful in their careers, and they're like, I can't do this. And we're
Right.
like, well, you're on the permission slip plan.
Right.
Like, do it, and you will learn how to do it. But it is a skill. But you have to learn to listen to other people and trust other people who know what they're doing.
And as I'm listening to you, like, I hear power. Some people feel like they have to have the power. Like you said, if you're in a corporate America, and especially if you have like people underneath of you, sometimes you don't know how to dial back that, I'm a manager, I'm a director, I'm the president. Sometimes you don't know how to dial that back. But then there's another part of it that I also hear, which is the fear of rejection as well. A lot of times we don't know how to deal with rejection. one way or the other, whether or not we have the power or not, there's still that underlining situation. So how would someone, or how would you suggest for someone to deal with something like that? Because we're going through a divorce. Like you said, we might be losing the kids or losing the house and the boat and, vacations and, look, we got to split this box of Cheerios, whatever the situation is,
Well,
right?
also your identity, like your identity in that relationship. People are going through a lot of grief, and
Right.
there's a lot of really big uncomfortable feelings. So not just rejection, but in our world, a lot of our clients' exes feel a strong sense of abandonment
Mm-hmm.
that ties back to childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a tremendous sense of failure. So here, we got married, we never imagined that we'd split, and
Right.
everything's falling apart, and I feel like a failure, but I can't deal with that. So we say that our clients' exes get very angry, and it becomes like, I'm the victim and you're the villain. And then they go on this terror campaign of trying to smear you at other people, to your children, to make everyone feel like they're right and you're wrong and you're awful. And so I think recognizing that is really important to, and especially in our community where, again, we're dealing with exes who have mental illness,
Right.
to understand where they're coming from and not to inflame things. Because Chris and I are part of something called the Amicable Divorce Network.
Okay.
And that really, even though it seems like the opposite, because we only deal with high conflict cases, but the goal is we want to reduce the conflict and we want to be focused on children and keep you out of court. So often when you're dealing with someone like the exes that we deal with, we say you don't want to start in with like filing motions and saying like, I'm going to get a pit bull attorney and blaming and you're right, you're wrong and I'm right and all this, because that puts people on the defense and that makes things really blow up, especially with someone like that. So that's why it's so important, again, to express as much tactical empathy as possible, to say, I know this is really hard for both of us. I'm so sorry that it didn't work out between us. But again, like, I'm sure that we love our kids more than anything. How can we work together to get them through this as healthy and unscathed as possible?
Wow.
So asking questions and not telling them this is what we should be doing, even though you want to, even though you feel like you know better and they're crazy and, got all kinds of problems, like you cannot act like you are superior to your co-parent. And so presenting that communication is really important because you want to keep them disarmed and still at the table to talk about it, rather than coming to like mediation or even like a conversation, making them feel like they're a terrible person. They're already feeling like a terrible person, whether
Right.
they're expressing it in anger and rage. Underneath it is that heartbreak.
Yeah.
I often say there's heartbreak underneath that hostility. So recognize that and just be like, we don't need to make it worse. Like, I'm going to do everything I can, even if I've got the most difficult ex, like the yin and yang. You think like one's coming this way, you bend and you figure out how to work with that instead of just both of you hitting heads.
Wow. So Lisa, we appreciate you coming on the show. So, for those of us that are out there listening that are struggling with communication, we don't have that skill. We need some expertise, right? So where can they find you and your partner in this, so that way, hey, because I'm going through a difficult situation, I need someone to kind of really coach me through this process. So where can they find you and your information?
Okay, so super, super easy. We're Been There, Got Out. Our website is beenthere.gotout.com. We're on social media at Been There, Got Out with little underscores between the Been There, Got Out. We have a podcast. We have a YouTube channel. Our first book came out in
Nice.
2023. It's called Been There, Got Out: Toxic Relationships, High Conflict Divorce, and How to Stay Sane Under Insane Circumstances. And the one we're working on now, that'll be out in November of this year, is also Been There, Got Out, like how to handle when your ex is turning the kids against you, since that's unfortunately something we see all the time. So, but very easy, just Been There, Got Out. You'll find it.
Great.
Nice. So, like I said, we thank you very much for coming on the show, but we do have one more question for you before we let you go.
Yes. And most definitely all of your information will be available in the show notes. For those that are listening, we'll be able to find all of the information about Lisa and Chris in the show notes. But Lisa, before we go with this last question, I know that Chris is your partner and you guys have been together, you said 10 years plus. And
Yep.
you've done so much great work together, and we applaud you and we thank you for all that you're doing. But my last question is to you specifically. If you could sing a duet with anyone in the world, living or deceased, who would you sing that duet with?
I hate singing this song. But all right, I would sing it with my daughter
Okay.
because we
Nice.
sing in the car together and we have
Oh,
so much fun, and her voice is way better than mine, so it kind of
yes.
drowns mine out. So that's how
Good.
I would sing a
Oh,
duet
yes.
with.
Car karaoke is
That's
always great. We
nice.
love car karaoke.
Yes.
Oh, great. So shout out to your daughter. So,
Yes, most definitely.
yes, so wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
That was an interesting last question.
You could tell your face. You was totally thrown off.
I was. I'm like, are you guys singers? Do you like to sing? That like where'd that
It's
come
just that. So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that when I met Kafa, I was the president of a choir, so I invited her to come sing with me on the choir. So
from?
yeah,
Oh, I
so
love
So,
that.
but the question came from a deck of
cards.
cards
Yeah.
for podcasters to ask questions. So
Yeah.
we just went through that, and that was just one of the questions that we really liked, and it's kind of stuck with us a little bit. And again, because of our story, we met in
Yep.
Yeah.
the church choir, so that's kind of our story. We like that.
And we
So,
like to end the show off on a positive note,
yeah,
and it gives everyone something to laugh at and to take into, the next day, if not,
Mhm.
So yeah,
and
but I
some of our
appreciate you.
topics can be kind of heavy, and
Right.
we don't want to leave it out that way. There is fun in everything. So we
Yeah.
we try to find the silver lining behind everything. So thank you so much.
No, it was such a pleasure. I love
Yes,
meeting you guys.
yes.
Thank you. That flew by.
Yes,
It did. It
It
did. It
did.
did. So we had a great time. So our listeners, again, all of Lisa's information will be available in the show notes. Please reach out to her and her team. And we thank you so much for listening.
And we will talk to you just a little bit later.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the No Fruit Podcast, where we bring you fruitful conversations, ripened wisdom, and love that's deeply rooted. We hope today's discussion left you feeling uplifted, encouraged, and ready to take on life's journey with purpose. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration in their day. You can catch up on past episodes, send us your thoughts, or learn more about us on social media. Until next time, stay rooted in love, and remember, every seed you plant today shapes the fruit of tomorrow. Take care, and we'll see you next time.